Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is a continuation of the video that I did 2 days ago, talking about the social interaction pillar found in the AD&D First Edition, Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook to a certain extent, and then utilizing the supplement, the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Rogues Gallery, to help flesh out those characters. And between all of these resources that were part of the AD&D First Edition core rules and such, you have all of the tools that you need in order to create a named NPC that is going to support and even enhance the social interaction between the player characters and the world in which they are adventuring in. Now, very specifically, I was talking about creating mentees or students of the player character party. So each member is going to have a student that they are going to begin to train. All the player characters in my group are either 5th or 6th level at this point, and that's the level that I determined would be when they would begin to start training first level characters. Now, as they go forward, these characters will eventually become, these NPCs will eventually become their very first follower. Most likely like their second in command or their primary assistant, and then that individual will go out there and continue to scout out and hire additional individuals to support their individual character. But as I spoke in the last video as well, because the player party is so interconnected with one another, they're going to know the students of each other's characters, and they're going to also have opportunities to interact with them as well. And so this does create an ever-expanding network of support for the primary adventure party. And at later high-level character play, when this really becomes domain play, which some refer to it as, the player characters may become, at one point in very high levels, the NPCs of this ongoing campaign world, and somewhere down the line of the followers of followers of followers might become their new line of player characters that they will then take control over. And so it creates an evolving interconnection and an evolving history and living, breathing campaign world when these things kind of go, in a somewhat generational kind of flow of things. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to create an example NPC using the tools that come in the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as other supplements that I mentioned. And I'm going to mock up one character just so that you can see how easy this is to really piece it together. And then I'll sit back and see if it needs any tweaking thereafter. So I'm going to go straight up random and then see how it needs to be altered, because obviously as a dungeon master, you do want to make sure that any character that you're introducing is, number one, interesting, but number two, it still has to work for whomever they're going to be the first student of. All right, so without further ado, let me switch over and show you. So some of the things that I'm actually using is I just printed out pages 100 through really pages 100 through 110 is everything that you'll need. That also covers like siegecraft and construction and those kinds of things. That becomes part of the domain game a little bit later on, but all of these things that I'm talking about are leading up to that point anyway. So you have the non-player character facts and traits, and that's where we're going to begin with in taking a look at it. So on page 100 of the DMG, we have the adjustments to the ability dice rolls for non-player characters based on their racial traits. Then you have the class-based, minimums or prerequisite requirements. Excuse me. You have occupations. So if you are making a tavern keeper, you have laborers, you have mercenaries, you have merchants and traders. And so these allow for adjustments that you would do to their attributes as well. But a lot of that work is actually done with the Rogues Gallery. And so the Rogues Gallery just allows you to make one roll, and it will determine a lot of those things with, again, some minor tweaking on your part. And I'll show you how that basically works. But in the DMG, you have things such as alignment and possessions and appearance and so on and so forth. And I made a sheet that I think you're going to find helpful for you to do, something very similar, or you can, basically just do the same thing that I did here. So let me show you that sheet before we move ahead. So I created like a spreadsheet here for a character. Now this is going to be for Angus. He's a fighter 5th level. He's a future bard, so that's going to play an interesting part in his, in his mentorship of this character, because once he switches from fighter to thief, because he's progressing towards becoming a bard, he might only be able to mentor this first level fighter for first and second level, and then beyond that he won't be able to, because Angus will then revert to becoming a first level thief and no longer will be able to train this individual. So that was one thing. Now, this is not the character that Angus is actually going to meet and play with this afternoon or this evening. So, but he's going to be my example, quasi-example to start off with. So I made this sheet here, and this is pulling the information, pretty much straight up from the Rogues Gallery. So it has the race, the sex, the alignment, strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma, level, hit points, and AC, age category, height and size. I put because I want to know, what is their actual height, and then is that under, average, or over? Same thing with weight and size. General appearance, just some little notes, any details that really stand out. That's not in the book. That's something that you're going to flesh out as a DM just to make it a little bit more interesting. Sanity or mental capacity, their tendencies, personalities, and personality type, whether an introvert or an extrovert, their disposition, general disposition, intellect, usually tied to just the intelligence, but you might add a little bit more flavor to it as well. Their nature, their materialism, their honesty, their bravery, their energy or drive. We have their thrift or their spending habits, their morals or their trustworthiness, their piety or purity, their interests, their collections. That could include like a family heirloom or something along those lines. And then this is just what season and session, and this is just for my own campaign management. When was this character introduced? At what level were they introduced? The total number of years, months, and days that they were in the service of this player character. What is their current level? Are they still alive? If they did die, what season or session number did they die in? And then just notes that I would include here. So each one of the player characters in my group is going to have this. And we're just going to flesh out for the very beginning their first NPC, assistant, student, and then later on we can add more as needed. So I'm going to go back over here, and I'm just going to try to pull this. So over here on roll 20, I have the first character that I'm going to focus on. So this is Angus the fighter. He's chaotic good, and these are just things that I want to know a little bit about the player character that this assistant is going to be attached to. And so that's why I'm, just taking a real quick look at this over, just to get a sense of this character when I start looking to see, well, how are they going to potentially mesh? Maybe it's good to have somebody that might clash, to a certain extent. So I like looking at their non-weapon proficiencies. So he has direction sense, he has blind fighting, he has tracking. He's a former ranger, so that's another important thing to remember about the player character is you want to know some of the back history of the player character, and that really helps when you've been with the same player, with the same character as a DM since the very beginning as well. So this wasn't a character that was introduced somewhere along the lines of the adventures. He was one of my original group, and still moving along. So Angus the fighter is actually developed quite a bit as a character from the very start to now session 38. So we're 38 or possibly even 39 weeks in, at this point. And so this character has shown some changes and growth, which is, really cool to consider. So now I'm going to go to start using the, I'm just going to come off of there. I'm going to start using these tables to start generating that information. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Rogues Gallery, and there's a section on fighters. And I'm just going to mock up this fighter so that you can see where it goes. Now, unfortunately, I can't switch back and forth between these, several screens. So I'm just going to make a very generic fighter here. And if you have this supplement, it's really, really useful. So, and I'm going to actually roll this. So let's see. So fighters have a total of 100 selections or possibilities. So I'm going to roll a D100. And I rolled a 67. So on a 67, now some of these things are going to have to alter most likely. So he is a human. And I'm going to put a little annotation here of 67 so I know what the base was. I will actually show it here. I'm going to switch views here so you can see. So he's a human, male. Now this alignment is actually neutral evil. Now, obviously you can make changes to this if you want to as a DM, and or you could leave it as is because that might actually play in to the characterization as well. So let me just get the rest of these stats. So we have a 14 strength, a 10 intelligence, a 7 wisdom, a 10 dexterity, a 9 constitution, a 12 charisma. Now this one here on the chart is a level 5, but I have to make him a level 1. Hit points at starting level is that he has an AC of 5. So that's what I got just straight from the Rogues Gallery. All right, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to those other pages that come straight out of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And the first one, so I've already rolled the alignment. Alignment was generated by doing that, although I could actually go in here and roll a d10 to determine alignment, and I rolled a 10, which would end up being neutral. So, so that might actually be a better choice to go with anyway, considering that if he is going to be with Angus, who is chaotic good, it would be kind of hard to link him up with someone who is neutral evil, although it could possibly be. Then I'm going to go to their possessions, which I actually brought it down over here, even though it comes up earlier on in the charts. I'm going to go down here and just do it in the order that are on this sheet. So his possessions, which is listed as wealth, collections, interest, piety. Let's see. I might have even skipped possessions. Wait. Disposition, personality, disposition. I skipped over that. So, so that'll be something that I put in the notes. So as a note under possessions, let's just roll a d10. It was 5. It was average. All right. So he's kind of, possessions was average. His age. Now you could also go into the age charts, but his age is a 9, so he's old. Again, very strange. He's old. His general appearance is also a 9, nondescript. His sanity and mental health is a 1. He's very stable. His general tendencies. Now, this roll that you make on the general tendencies chart has a d12 and a d6. So what you do is you roll the d6, and on a 1, 2, and 3, you're going to go from 1 to 12. And on a 4, 5, or 6, you're going to roll on a 13 through 24. So I'm going to roll the first d6. So I'm working with 1, 2, and 3. And so now a d12, I rolled a 12. And so he is suspicious and cautious. All right, so that is under a general tendency. So he's suspicious. Now I come in here and I get to his personality. So his personality and type. So again, we're rolling 2 d8s. The first d8 on a 1 to 5, it's going to be average. On a 6 or 7, it's going to be extroverted. And on a 8, it's going to be introverted. So let's see. So he rolled a 4. And so he's going to be average. And my second roll is a 7. So he's going to be diplomatic. So he is... So his personality is diplomatic and average. His disposition is going to be, this is a straight up 1d10 roll. His disposition is even-tempered. His intellect is an 8. He is anti-intellectual. With a 10 in intelligence, so I mean, you wouldn't normally think. It just means that he's intelligent, but he's not like he doesn't believe in like maybe book smarts or that kind of thing. He doesn't respect it. So you can go along that line. His nature, his general nature. So this is a straight up D6 roll. And a 4, we end up with unforgiving. His materialism is a straight up D6. A 4, he is covetous. His honesty is a D8. So I rolled an 8. He is deceitful. His bravery is on a D8 roll, and he is normal bravery. His energy or drive is a D8, and he is driven. His thriftiness and spending is a 4, which is average. That might be useful if you are sending out this NPC to go find yourself a bargain or look for something to purchase for you. And if they're average thrift or spending, they're going to look for the best, the best of both worlds. The best quality for the best price that they can find. If they're wasteful in their spending, they might spend more for something of less quality just because it's easy for them to get. Their morals or trust. Let's see. Their morals is a D12. And he rolled a 9, which is amoral. His piety is going to be, that's a D12 roll. He is pious. His interests, so this is a D12 and a D6. So you roll the D6 first. On a 1, 2, and 3, it is going to be the first column for 1 through 12. On a 4, 5, or 6, which is what he rolled, it's going to be on the second set of D12. So he likes foods and preparation. His collections is a D12 roll. And he rolled a 4, which is shields and weapons. Okay. And then we would mark in here for this here, we would start marking in. So this is actually season 2, session, I believe it is 30, possibly 38. I got to double check my charts. He's coming in at 1, and we have no other information to fill out. So let's start taking a look at this character and seeing what is what is workable. Now, obviously the age is a problem. Him coming in as old. Now we can double check and take a look at what the old range is for player characters of this. And actually, I don't have the age chart here in front of me, do I? I don't. That's elsewhere. But his height and weight and everything, I would certainly consider modifying their age chart, which you'll get from the player's handbook when creating new characters. I would not have a first level character starting out as old. It should either be very young, at the most middle-aged, if they're a late starter. But we did notice that there were several of these things that do conflict with each other. And that's where the Dungeon Master has to come in and make some modifications. So let me change this here. And so let's start looking at it. So he's nondescript in appearance. He's very stable mentally. However, his tendencies are suspicious. He acts diplomatically, but his disposition is even-tempered. So that kind of calls into that question, can you be even-tempered and suspicious at the same time? Maybe not. He's anti-intellectual. His nature is, you know, he's he's covetous, and he's not he's not very social. So we're starting to run into, he's deceitful as far as honesty is concerned, which would run in conflict with the fact that he was pious. His morals are amoral, which would work with suspicious, would work with deceitful, but not work with that pious or that average. So anytime that you are using random generators, especially when you're kind of developing a character and looking to see what kind of works, sometimes there's it's okay to have some internal personality conflict with a character, but to have somebody that's on such extremes and is still mentally stable or very stable as far as their sanity and mental capacity is something that is incongruous. It doesn't really work. If he had a different sanity, or if I chose, I'm going to make this person a little bit less stable. And so that's how I can describe, how that comes about. That becomes a little bit more workable, makes more sense. So no matter what you're doing here, in the end, the character has to make sense. Otherwise, it just becomes very difficult to role play something that doesn't come together that well. In translating this character through a social interaction. It would be very hard to role play, I think, if you have to keep in mind, well, what mood is this person currently in at this moment? Is that going to be very random, especially if you're dealing with a character with an unstable sanity? It becomes very, very difficult to do that. You don't want to generate too much dice rolling when you're role playing. You want to have the role playing be more of an interaction between what is the character saying or doing, and then how is the NPC responding to that, knowing the NPC's social and psychological background and such. What are their interests? If they're talking about their interests, then they're going to be more responsive if they're talking about something they know nothing about. So you can use these charts and pick certain things to pair them up to make a cohesive character, and then leave other parts of it to be kind of random, because it might make the character more interesting. So it's a back and forth. Now, all we have to do is come up with a name for this, character. And let me see. So there's all kinds of things that you can find online that will help you do these various things. One of them I found is, fantasy game generators. You also have great dice rollers and all kinds of stuff here. So this is a human male character. So I'm just going to go over, and they have all of the Dungeons and Dragons playable races, playable races for player characters, playable races for NPCs. So I'm just going to go with a human. Let me find human. They are alphabetical. And there we go. And then I am just going to go with male names. And I'm going to go with the very top one. All right, that could be another thing that you do as your as part of your campaign, just kind of like the way that you're playing the game out, is to just come up with random names for everybody. It makes it a little bit easier. It also adds a lot more diversity to, all the names don't sound the same kind of thing. So this person's name would be Buber Danum. So I would just write that on here. So this mentee's name is Bubeir Buber Danen. DANNAM. All right, and so there we have our first, first level character, ready to go to meet their mentor and to begin their adventures on in the background as the player character group is running through their campaign. And every once in a while, when they're both in town at the same time, and either the mentee is ready to be trained up, or maybe the mentor is in town himself, getting trained, and the mentee happens to be there looking, they can make contact during that time. And that's when the mentor can tell the mentee, oh, this is what I need you to go do. And that becomes their kind of adventure that you're running in the background as the DM. You might get to the point where the players are so set in with their own characters and they're really pushing up at that higher level, and they're looking to be more directive of what their entourage is doing. They might even take control over those characters that are beneath them and run adventures with them instead. So it keeps it part of the cohesive campaign that you're running. But that I don't do or wouldn't consider doing until the primary player character group is essentially in those later stages of their development. They're high level, probably 12 plus, at that point, and looking to kind of settle down or only become involved with really truly like epic kind of adventures that require high player character level play. And yet, so they become more of the background, and this new crop of adventurers starts filling in that those game sessions and expanding into different areas of the world, but always having that place to come home to, and and get their training and move forward as well as that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with this. There's a lot of tools that are in the AD&D First Edition core books that you can use to enhance the social interaction. There's still a lot of flexibility. As I said, you as a DM, you have to be willing to say, well, I know that this is what the random generation produced, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not cheating at anything. You're just making it so that the character really works, because random generators are inadequate to always make sense. And so you bottom line, you want the character to work, you want the character to be interesting, but the character has to make sense ultimately. Otherwise, your players are not going to buy into the character if there's just no sense about them. It's too hard to predict what they may or may not do, or it's just not a good working mesh. I would avoid, excuse me, I would avoid having the players create their own first mentee. All right. That might be, they could create a secondary character that they may or may not play later on. But I wouldn't have them create their first. And the reason being is that I want there to be a little bit of mystery for them. I want there to be, a bit of surprise and discovery of meeting new NPCs, and integrating them into their circle of association in a very organic and natural way that would develop. If they're creating a character for themselves to be their student, then they're automatically going to have a connection there, and so it doesn't develop naturally. It's just like by default, and I don't want to create that. So Tonight's session of my game, this is exactly what we're going to be doing. Is that we are going to be they're going to be introduced. My player party is going to be introduced to their students, and these will be first introductions. There might be a few little as they're talking and seeing what's going on. They might get some more background information about who they're training, and maybe this might lead to some side quests off the main adventure path that the player characters are currently on. They're in between official modules, if you want to say it that way, even though I highly modify them. They're basically just maps that I'm using, and I'm adding different story elements tied to the campaign world that the players are actually in. But they are at this point coming out of a training session and just getting prepared to see, well, where do we go next, kind of thing. And they have a lot of choice and flexibility in there. And so that's what I'm going to devise tonight's session to do, is to, for them to meet these characters and then see where it takes us for our next session. So once again, thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me switch back over here to the cover. So real quick recap. This is AD&D First Edition Social Interaction Pillar. Creating NPCs or named NPCs. And there's a difference between a named NPC and an NPC that the player characters might meet once and never see again. I certainly don't suggest that you go through this amount of detail to create a character that they're going to see once. Just do a random name up, just right off the top of your head. Say, oh, this is a female half-elf, bartender. Her name is this, and you just throw up that random generator name, and they may never see this character again. Now, a couple weeks down the road, if they happen to go back to that same village, happen to go back into that same tavern, maybe they'll see her, maybe they won't. If they do see her, maybe she has an issue that, now she's a reoccurring character. Now you might want to start fleshing out some parts of this character, or maybe, again, they're just going in. The players have no real interest in getting to know this NPC. And so you keep that NPC kind of in the fade. I used to call it the blur of the world that they're in. Around the player characters, everything is very, crisp and in focus. And everything beyond their sphere of influence and interest is kind of in the blur. And so as these NPCs come out of the blur into clarity, that's when they become named. And that's when they become characters that the players are going to have their characters look for when they go into a location that they've been in previously. And so you're going to end up having a long list of named NPCs and friends and foes and neutral characters to the objectives of the player party. And these reoccurring characters will become a very important part in making your world seem like it's a living, breathing world, which is really the ultimate goal of role-playing games. And it's also, the ultimate goal of ensuring that you're hitting on the social interaction pillar. You're always going to have the combat pillar, involved in your gaming as well, and you're going to have that exploration, because as you're going from one locale to another, you are generating these different NPCs that they're going to encounter on a frequent basis, and so that is also in a form of an exploration. You're learning about new places, learning about new people, and interacting with them. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm hoping that my players check it out this afternoon before this evening's game, so that they can see that, hey, this is where we're going to kind of go. And, and then we'll see how it works out. We'll talk about this. We will get around to doing our weekly recap of, of the last 3 sessions that we had done, bringing to a close, Keep on the Borderlands, and then maybe they'll talk about what our next steps are, because we'll know it by the time we get to doing that live stream later on in the week, what their next steps were, and maybe they'll talk about their new students, and what their interaction with their new student, how that worked out for them. So once again, thanks for joining. I hope you like this video. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section, and you all have a great rest of your afternoon. And I look forward to seeing you on the game screen sometime soon. Take care.